Ephraim's grave, 9 miles.
When Frank Clark came to this area July 13th, 1911, to herd sheep, it was considered the worst bear-infested area in Utah. Black and brown bear were numerous, and each year a number of them were trapped and killed, but not Old Ephraim. He was a little too clever. Only 2 or 3 men had ever actually seen him. One of them was Mr. Clark's pal Sam Kemp from Portage, Utah. Sam was tending sheep in this area the summer of 1913. One morning Sam came almost face to face with Ephraim. As the huge bear rose up on its hind legs, Sam became so frightened and unnerved that he backed slowly away. He was fully armed, but he could not and dared not fire a shot. So they parted in a friendly manner, going in opposite directions, and never saw each other again. Mr. Clark heard about Old Ephraim when he first came to this area in 1911, and by 1913 he knew quite well his habits and where he traveled and was always on the lookout for him. Sam Kemp told Clark about bumping into Ephraim, so he had a fairly good idea of the size of the monster. This great king of Cache National Forest was widely known. His nightly killings had been going on for years. His activities were first observed in the north end of the forest near Soda Springs, Idaho. Over the years, he drifted as far south as Weber County, Utah, but for the past 10 or 12 years, he made his home in the upper areas of Right-Hand Fork of Logan Canyon, Elk Valley, and Temple Fork Canyons. He had made his wallow about halfway up a hollow where water from a spring trickles down a ravine. He would make his visits to the sheep herds for meat and return to the wallow about every 6 or 7 days. Sometimes he would stay around there 2 or 3 days if the weather was hot. One day Mr. Clark came across the wallow. It was 10 or 15 feet in diameter and had about a foot or 2 of water in it. He could see very large tracks in the dust on the bank and noticed that one track showed only 3 toes. So Frank decided they were the tracks of Old Ephraim because the herders used to call him Old 3 Toes. Clark decided that would be a good place to put a trap. So as soon as he could, he got the largest trap he could find and put it in the wallow. Then he went about tending his sheep. Bears feed on a great variety of wild fruits, piñon nuts, rodents, fish. They also like to eat grass and clover and other green plants. In fact, they will eat almost any kind of food. But once they get a taste of a cow or sheep and learn how easily they are to get, they are not content to leave them alone. Old Ephraim could break the back of a cow or an elk with a single blow of his huge paw, but preferred to kill sheep rather than cows. Bears can't see very far, but they do have a very keen sense of smell and can hear fairly well. They can run fast, too. They can easily outrun a horse in the woods. They locate the sheep herds as soon as they come up onto the range and follow them all summer, killing sheep whenever they'd like. They don't always wait until it gets dark. They like to kill at daybreak as the sheep start to graze. After they have eaten what they want, coyotes come along and clean up the rest, leaving a few scraps for the birds. Frank Clark was not afraid of bears. He killed 43 in the 34 years he spent in Cache National Forest. Government trappers were trapping in this area trying to get rid of some of the bears. They were getting too numerous and were killing a large number of sheep every summer. Mr. Clark counted 150 dead sheep the first summer he came here. The bears were bad killers and scared the herders until they would not stay on the job. The sheep owners were having a hard time getting men to go up there and tend the sheep. Just the day before Clark set his trap in the wallow, 8 sheep were killed in the Reese herd. The bears were not content to kill 1 or 2 sheep and eat them, but would run through the herd, knock over as many as they could hit, and then start eating them. They would roll the sheep over on its back and rip its body open and eat the tender parts of the inside, then leave it alive, struggling for its life, and go for another sheep. Almost every day, Clark would find a sheep or 2 still alive and would have to shoot them to put them out of their misery. One day he found 23 left that way. He also saw a bear eating a fawn deer while its mother was a distance away, helplessly looking on. He saw bears pulling down birds' nests, looking for eggs or birds that may be in them. Seeing these incidents every day exasperated Frank to no end. For 10 years, Clark tried every way he could think of to get Ephraim into a trap. But every time the bear went into the wallow, he would take the trap out and put it on the bank without setting it off. Then take his mud bath and leave before daylight. Even though Clark was discouraged, He was going to keep on trying to catch Ephraim. He put the trap back into the wallow, covered his tracks, also the log chain and log that was attached to the other end of the chain, then went back to his camp, which was about a mile down the hollow near the head of the right fork of Logan Canyon. He knew Old Ephraim would be killing more sheep in that area and would return again to his wallow and maybe step into the trap. It was strange to Clark that an animal as large as Old Ephraim kept out of sight in the daytime. In all these years, he had only been seen 2 or 3 times. Clark saw him one morning carrying a sheep up the side of a mountain. He shot at him several times but did not hit him. He was too far away. However, he made him drop the sheep and scamper for cover. The next morning, Clark went to Ephraim's wallow to see if anything had happened. There was a trap up on the bank again. This time, however, it had been sprung, but it didn't catch the bear. It must have made him suspicious because he dug a new pool below the old one and water had drained into it. He had taken his bath in it and gone on his way. Clark was not surprised to find that Ephraim had visited the wallow because sometimes when the weather was hot, he would stay in the area 2 or 3 days. His large tracks were easily seen where he had gone in and out of the pool, so there was no doubt in Clark's mind who removed the trap and made the new wallow, which must have kept him busy most of the night. Clark wasn't about to give up and decided to make another try at catching him. He set the huge trap into the new wallow. He stirred the mud good and let it settle over the trap and covered the log chain and the log which was attached to the side of the pool and to the far end of the chain. The log was about 1 foot in diameter and 9 feet long, heavy enough that the bear could drag it if he got caught in the trap. Trappers didn't attach the chain of the trap to a solid object because in such a case, the bear, if caught in a trap, would chew off his foot or break off the jaws of the trap. Clark then got some willows, made a brush with it, which he used to remove his tracks from around the pool and made the area look like it had not been disturbed, then went about tending his sheep. The night of August 21st, 1923 was a beautiful starry night. After supper, Clark sat alone gazing at the millions of bright stars so familiar to him in his outdoor life. He could hear the tinkling of bells on the necks of his horses as they were feeding in the meadows and hillsides nearby, and now and then the sad call of a lonely coyote. All else was still. The sheep had bedded down for the night, the birds had gone to rest, and his dogs were curled up on saddle blankets near the tent. It was getting late, so Clark went on to bed as usual. He had been to sleep 2 or 3 hours when he was awakened by a strange sound up the hollow. It was an awful roar mingled with pain and misery. It would ring around the hills, and between screams it seemed like everything in the hills was listening for the next roar. He tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. Clark didn't know that Ephraim had gone to his new wallow, and in a moment of carelessness had stepped on the trigger of the trap. The mighty jaws of the steel trap had snapped shut on his right leg with a vice-like grip. Ephraim roared, jumped out of the wallow, and started to run. He was terrified when the chain that was fastened to the trap stopped him. Old-time bear hunters say there is nothing that will enrage a grizzly bear so much as to be caught and held in a trap. The enraged Ephraim fought and gnawed at the trap and chain as he dragged the log down the hollow. Finally, the log caught between some trees and held him fast. Then he was furious. He roared and plunged and fought with all his savage fury. The jaws of the great trap held his leg in a solid grip. He could not get it off, so he started to work on the chain. He followed it to the log and tried to break it loose, but it was fastened securely. There was a ring on the end of the chain, and the chain had been put through it as it was placed around the log. Ephraim bit at this ring, twisting, crushing, and turning it until it broke in 2. His mouth was bleeding, and one of his great teeth had broken off. Now he was free from the log, he started down the hollow again. He was badly hurt. He had been tricked by a man and was going to get revenge. It is written that the grizzly bear in his primitive state was a very peaceful animal, one who would not start a fight, but man with his rifle has changed the nature of the grizzly and made him the most ferocious fighter of all animals. They all fear him and keep out of his way. Ephraim bit at the trap and chain but could not get free from its powerful grip. The more he tore at the trap, the more severe the pain became. He was raging mad. He knew where Clark's camp was. He had seen it many times and seemed to know it was Clark who set the trap for him, and he was going down there to fight it out with him. He screamed with pain and roared with anger as he smashed through the trees and brush in the darkness of the night. After listening to the roaring and screaming for some time, Clark thought it might be a horse down. They make an awful noise in their agony when they go down. He realized the noise was getting close. He got up, put on his shoes, got his rifle, in his underwear, went up the trail 300 or 400 yards. It was dark and too cold for BBDs. He hadn't gone far when he heard the chain rattle. Then he realized that Ephraim was in the trap, because no other bears went into his wallow. The roaring stopped for a few minutes as Clark went up the trail. When it started again, Clark stopped to try and find out where he was. He was down in the wash in the brush between Clark and his camp. Clark had walked within about 10 feet from him, and he was going up the trail. Clark was now shaking from fear and cold. Mostly fear. For once, he was really scared. He had killed many bears, but this was different. This was a fierce, raging, wounded grizzly, the largest one ever seen in this country, and it was dark. He was sure there were 7 cartridges in his .25-35, all steel balls. What should he do now? Both sides of the hollow were covered with brush. He couldn't get off the trail in the darkness, so decided to crawl up on the side hill a little way and keep quiet, and listen to Ephraim's groans and bellows the rest of the night. Daylight at last, and Clark, plenty mad and ready for battle, went down where he had last heard the bear. It was under some willows in the wash. Clark couldn't see him very well, so he got a pole and tried to poke him. He slipped away, went down near the camp, and hid in a patch of willows. It was getting lighter now, so Clark went down there and got sight of part of him and took a shot at him, hitting him in the top of his back. Ephraim rose up in all his greatness, with a 23-pound bear trap clamped on his right foot, 14-foot log chain wound neatly around his leg, held high above his head. His back was towards Clark. He turned around and started for Clark, still holding the trap above his head. Clark became paralyzed with fear as he faced the huge monster. He was rooted to the earth and let Ephraim come within 6 feet of him before he could lift up his gun and pull the trigger. The first shot staggered him back a little. Another shot. Again he staggered. 3 more shots did not knock him down. Still on his feet, holding that trap up, he faced Clark. In front of him was a 4-foot bank which kept him from coming any closer. He turned around, went back to the wash, and walked up it about 15 or 20 feet to a place where the trail crossed it. Clark could see his head and the trap above the willows and thought Ephraim had had enough and was going away. But not so. For him the battle was still on, and he was looking for a way to get to Clark. He came up out of the brush and onto the trail Clark was on. Clark was filled with amazement as he got his first view of the entire body of the great bear. He appeared to be at least 10 feet tall, with the trap above his head. His right leg, head, neck, and breast were smeared with the blood from the wounds of his mouth and his foot, and the 6 balls of steel that had entered his body. Clark could see blood squirting from his snarling open mouth as he started for him. He had never before backed away from a bear, but this blood-smeared charging monster was way too much for him to face with only 1 bullet in his rifle. He started to step back and caught his foot on some brush and fell flat on his back. He scrambled to his feet as quickly as he could and started for Logan, 20 miles away, with Ephraim close behind him, roaring with anger. As he rounded a turn, he heard his dog Jenny barking. It had appeared on the scene for the first time and was biting the bear's heels. Ephraim did not like that and stopped to fight it. Clark turned back and urged the dog on. As Clark got close, the bear started for him again. Clark could see he was badly hurt. He was waddling along on his hind legs, blood spouting from his nostrils at each breath. He turned again to hit the dog. Clark stepped up as close as he dare and fired the remaining shot into the side of the bear's head. With a prayer in his heart, it would finish him. It did. The massive form of the great beast fell forward, rolled a little, and hit the ground with a thud just in front of Clark. A strange, faint feeling came over him. His knees were shaking and buckled as he sat down beside the trail and watched the Great Spirit depart from the great body. It seemed like a long time. Finally, Ephraim's head raised just a little, looked Clark into the eyes, and fell to the ground again and was still. Was Clark happy? No, he was not happy, only thankful it was all over, and he was alive. He decided then and there he would never kill another bear. Every summer for 10 years he had tried every way he could think of to annihilate that bear because he thought it had to be done. Now he felt sorry that he had to do it. This rugged 4½ ton native stone is symbolic of a giant grizzly bear called Old Ephraim, who ranged this area for many years, killing sheep, cattle, and game, and was trapped, shot, and buried near here August 1923 by Frank Clark of Moab, Idaho. Standing upright, he equaled the height of this monument, 9 feet 11 inches, and weighed about 1,100 pounds. Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. has his skull, erected by local scouts and scouters, August 22nd, 1966. When we did this ride last fall, we just had the 100-year commemoration of these events and kind of inspired us to take a ride up there to see his marker and inspired us to share his story and just kind of the legend of Old Ephraim. He's kind of a big deal around here. Since this marker was put up, his skull has been returned home, essentially. It is now on display in the library on the Utah State University campus in Logan, Utah. So he has been brought home. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this story. We hope you enjoyed the ride. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video, and we'll see you on the trail.